So about a month ago, I was fortunate enough to be invited to this Armored Core 6 preview event where I got to spend 5 hours with the game, and I reported what I played and what I enjoyed in a video. And you may recall that in that video I expressed how impressed I was with the game, and I had high expectations that FromSoftware was going to be able to revive the mech genre in a really big and triumphant way. And now I sit before you, having played over 30 hours of Armored Core 6, and yeah, I'm here to tell you that FromSoft have done the final release of Armored Core 6 justice.
Picking up signals from AC Rex.
This is one of those games that I had a hard time pulling myself away from because it is so fundamentally fun to play, and it's proof that FromSoftware can make amazing games beyond the Soulsborne genre. And make no mistake, Armored Core 6 is decidedly not a Soulsborne game. If you come into it with that kind of expectation, you might be disappointed. You will not be exploring one giant, seamless, open-world map. Combat isn't slow and methodical and consistently lethal. It's not about the struggle of traversing from one bonfire-type safe haven to the next. You won't find an RPG-style progression system where you permanently invest stat points. And basically, any notions you have about this being Soulsborne with mechs should be thrown out the window. You will instead be engaging in particle effects-laden, fast-paced, dizzyingly so at times, arcade-style, omnidirectional combat that sees you become a powerful, mechanical force of nature. And you'll be hopping from mission to mission chosen from menus at your garage hub that you'll constantly be returning to, with larger scale missions featuring generous checkpoints between key moments, the completion of which will earn you money to spend on mech parts for customization, be it body parts, limbs, weapons, or performance-enhancing internal components. And through this gameplay loop, you'll be expanding your arsenal of parts to customize your mech with, to either create your ideal playstyle or to overcome challenges that may be facilitated by tailoring your mech to specific missions, encounters, or boss battles. Mech assembly is a core pillar of this game, whereas Soulsborne games demand you stick to one build for the long term and make every point you spend on stats permanently consequential. Armored Core lets you respec and recustomize your playable mech at pretty much any point. In fact, mech customization is so highly encouraged that the game will give you the option to access the assembly menu after you die during a mission. You can also sell parts for as much money as you bought them, so there is no consequence whatsoever to experimentation. Armored Core 6 constantly wants you to be thinking about and figuring out ideal mech builds, and trust me, there will be certain missions where you'll absolutely struggle if you don't think carefully about your mech builds. Just as you might start to think the game feels a bit easy or that you've figured out the game, you will very quickly be humbled by a spike in difficulty. FromSoftware's DNA can absolutely be felt in the level of challenge that some of these missions offer, requiring numerous attempts and a process of trial and error before achieving that euphoric sense of victory. A process that's aided by how quickly and generously you can return to a previous checkpoint or retry boss battles via the game's menu and fast loading times. There were a handful of missions that did take me multiple tries to beat due to their demanding encounter designs, and there were certain boss battles that straight up took me 2 to 3 hours to overcome, and when I did beat them, I did so by the skin of my teeth. It wasn't just about trying over and over again until I got good, though that was part of it. It was also an intellectual exercise in gauging what aspects of my mech were benefiting or hindering me, going back into mech assembly and figuring out what parts and weapons to switch out to make my mech better suited for a specific challenging scenario. While you will eventually settle into a mech build that will work for you maybe 80-90% of the time, don't get too attached. There will be at least a handful of missions where that mech build will just not work, or at least make your life much harder. As an example, I got real comfortable with this reverse-jointed legs mech build that allowed me to swiftly hop and maneuver around battle arenas while wielding some decently high-powered weapons, and for a while that build carried me through quite a few missions. But then came this one boss battle who could keep up with my mobility and just kicked my ass over and over and over again for like 40 minutes straight, and I didn't make that much progress and headway in depleting its health before I realized I could not brute force it with the build I'd gotten comfortable with. So eventually I decided to swallow my pride and go back to the drawing board, and I won't spoil what my solution was, but I made a completely different type of mech that changed frickin' everything. The boss battle suddenly became much easier and only took me a couple of tries, and it didn't feel like I found a shortcut or a cheat around it. It felt more like I figured something out, so that intellectual aspect was as important as the get good skills. I also talked about this boss battle at the end of Chapter 1, who I struggled with during my preview of this game. Well, when I played against this boss battle in the final release in this review process, adjustments to my mech build made a huge difference in how much more easily I was able to keep up with and dodge this boss's attacks, as well as go on the offensive for a swifter beatdown. In that sense, these kinds of encounters felt like they were a satisfying puzzle to solve. I'd say legs by far have the most impact on the way your mech feels to play. Styles of legs include more standard and balanced bipedal legs, reverse jointed legs that give you great jumping and hopping capabilities, tetrapod legs that grant the unique ability to hover in the air, and tank legs that allow for nimble and fast navigation on the ground. And for each of those leg types, the game will offer different weight classes that will allow you to prioritize a mech with higher agility at the expense of being able to wield heavier weapons, or a mech that's just chunkier and so can wield heavier weapons at the expense of agility. Or you can strike some kind of preferred balance in between. Arms also have a certain amount of weight burden they can support, so the arms you pick will determine the types of weapons you can wield and how heavy they can be. As for the head and body, they don't affect your gameplay style as much, but they do contribute to your mech's health, stability, which is Armored Core 6's version of Sekiro's posture, weight burden, energy capacity, which is Armored Core 6's version of stamina, boost capabilities, mobility, and more. And all of the other parts, including legs and arms and whatnot, all of those affect those elements as well based on the weight class and unique attributes of the different types of parts for those different types of categories. Beyond that, there are other considerations like what boosters, FCS or fire control system, and generators you use. So boosters will influence all of your different boosting and aerial options, just how effective you are at, jumping and thrusting upwards or hovering in the air or dodging in the air or on the ground and stuff like that. FCS will affect how effective your soft or hard lock is at tracking your enemies at short, medium, or long distance aiming, and generators will define your energy capacity and output. So the energy load of your mech build that may limit what parts you can equip based on their energy requirements, as well as how big and efficient your essentially stamina bar is in this game. Last but not least, you've got your weapons, of which you can equip up to 4, 1 on each hand and 1 on each shoulder. And there's quite the selection here to work with, from melee weapons to pistols to rifles to shotguns to machine guns to Gatling guns to energy and plasma and pulse weapons to explosive weapons of all types to deployable turrets to shields, and they all come in varying shapes and sizes and weight classes that allow you to further balance your mech build and tailor it to your requirements while having to deal with certain limitations that come with balancing all of the different parts so that your mech build is viable. Mech customization feels pretty deep, overwhelmingly so at times, with a sheer number of parts options you'll have at your disposal as you unlock them throughout the course of the campaign, and I imagine hardcore players will engage in plenty of theory crafting to maximize every aspect of certain types of mech builds, especially for online PvP combat. Fortunately, the game does offer tons of mech build save slots, so you can easily save and load all of your myriad assorted mech builds, so that's a huge help for switching back and forth between your numerous masterpieces, if you will.
Main system, activating combat mode.
Once you've crafted your ideal mech build, what awaits you is what I found to be a really great single-player campaign experience, one that is largely carried by how freaking good and addictive the combat in Armored Core 6 is. The controls are very easy to pick up. Trigger buttons shoot your hand weapons, shoulder buttons shoot your shoulder weapons. You move with your left analog stick, manipulate the camera with the right analog stick. The down face button is to jump and hover. The right face button is to activate boosted mobility, your run button essentially. The left face button is to quick boost, your dodge button. The up face button is your action button as well as your reload button. L3 is for a rocket-like boost maneuver called Assault Boost that is used to navigate long distances quickly or to close the gap between you and enemies for offensive follow-ups. R3 turns hard lock or manual aiming on and off. And then up on the D-pad, we'll use Estus-like limited heals known as repair kits, of which are granted 3 per mission. And down on the D-pad scans the area to highlight nearby enemies. Moving and maneuvering the mech around feels responsive. Weapons all feel impactful in their own unique way, in large part thanks to the game's fantastic visual and sound design. And it all paves the road to mechs that feel incredibly smooth, intuitive, satisfying, and fun to pilot. I even thought keyboard and mouse controls worked really well, and I imagine those who get used to playing the game with that input method will benefit from the swiftness and accuracy of mouse aiming. My only 2 qualms with the core gameplay mechanics would be that, 1, melee attack tracking can be wonky at times, so there are times when it feels like melee attacks will miss because it tracks the enemy in a weird way when it felt like the melee attack shouldn't have missed. And the second thing is that it's sometimes hard to tell when your hard lock-on is turned on or off when things get chaotic on screen, which can be detrimental in a game where enemies can break free of your hard lock-on if they move out of your line of sight fast enough. I wish there was just a clearer indicator because sometimes when enemies are really moving around very quickly, soft lock-on and hard lock-on can feel similar in the way they track enemies. The hard lock-on in Armored Core 6 is a lot looser than in Soulsborne, and I feel like they did so intentionally to emphasize the importance of mobility in Armored Core 6. But minor qualms aside, mech piloting and combat just feel fantastic, and combat itself also feels strategic because it is an exercise in resource management. In Soulsborne, you manage your stamina bar. That's the thing that will limit your actions like dodging and the like. In Armored Core 6, you've got the stamina equivalent, energy, and alongside that you've got your weapons, all of which have different reload times and ammo capacity and whatnot, and you have to consider all of those things because the reload times serve as cooldowns for your weapons, so you want to strategize a little bit in terms of how you use those weapons and just don't unleash a barrage that then leave you defenseless or without offense for a brief period of time that allows your enemies to catch up. Your stamina management or energy management also means you're limited in how many times you can dodge, how long you can stay in the air, and with all of that you have to consider just how much health you have, how many repair kits you have, and your stability, which if broken will result in your mech being stunned for some time, and how long you're stunned for is also based on how you build your mech and the like. But those same limitations also apply to your enemies, so my strategy was always to kind of try to get above my enemies and unleash a barrage of high-impact weapons that would deplete their stability and stun them, that would allow me to swoop in with a big melee attack, because while you're stunned or while the enemy is stunned when stability is broken, you deal direct damage to them, so you deplete their HP, or in the case of Armored Core 6, AP or armor points, a lot faster when their stability, again the Sekiro equivalent of posture, is broken down. So yeah, Armored Core 6's combat is very simple to pick up, but in the moment there are a lot of things to consider and keep in mind all at once to make sure that you're piloting your mech to its fullest capabilities and in the most efficient way possible, so that you don't get caught off guard, or so that you don't end up screwing yourself. And it's a lot about applying pressure, and it's just a combat system that's both intuitive but also requires a lot of focus, and every victory you feel like you earned because of how purposeful you have to be with your mech's movements and defensive and offensive capabilities. And all of it just feels incredible and exhilarating, which is further aided by how well this game performs, with the game consistently sitting at well over 100 frames per second on average on max settings on my NVIDIA RTX 3080 Ti at an ultra-wide resolution of 3440 by 1440. And yes, the game does support ultra-widescreen during gameplay. In cutscenes, ultra-widescreen does cut off after a certain point, and then certain sections of the game, like the Garage Hub, don't support ultra-widescreen at all, so you'll see the screen's aspect ratio, if you will, change when you use ultra-widescreen, but as long as it's fully supported during gameplay, I'm good, because I do have an ultra-widescreen, and it was fully supported, and it looked fantastic. in ultra-wide. You can just see so much more of the battle arena, so it's actually really helpful. There was only one mission involving this massive scale boss in Chapter 1 that showed the frame rate momentarily dipping below 100 into the low 60s when massive destruction effects occurred on screen, but other than that, the game's performance was pretty much near flawless in my experience, which greatly benefits such a fast-paced action game. Now, there are tons of PC configurations out there, and I don't know how well this game will run on all of them, but at least in my experience with an RTX 3080 Ti and a pretty powerful CPU, even with that powerful hardware, I've seen games struggle when they're not properly optimized, and Armored Core 6 showed no signs of being a poorly optimized game, but again, performance may vary from PC to PC. Now, all that great gameplay and the awesome combat mechanics wouldn't mean much without levels and encounters to match them, and Armored Core 6 does not disappoint on that front. Throughout the course of the campaign, which took me roughly 20 hours to beat for my first playthrough, closer to 25 hours if you include mission replays I partook in for higher ranks and the like, you will find missions of varying length, objectives, map sizes, and difficulty. Some might take a couple of minutes, offering something pretty chill, yet engaging and empowering. Others might take closer to a dozen minutes or more, taking place in larger maps or arenas designed to offer a challenge and force you to think more carefully about how you weave around and navigate cover and obstacles to dodge enemies and turrets that have been placed strategically to hinder you if you're careless. And these larger missions might string together a bunch of different encounters and scenarios. They might start with a large arena with a lot of enemies and turrets that will then take it to a 1v1 battle against another Armored Core mech that may then be followed by a more navigational-based objective, which might conclude with a giant boss battle, something along those lines. And there might be more unique objectives like dealing with stealth mechs, or having to dodge around certain security measures, or having to trigger or destroy certain things that will open up locked areas. And for those more difficult missions that serve as progress walls, usually in the form of tough encounters involving barrages of tougher enemies who will aim to overwhelm you, or major boss battles that will test your skills as a mech builder and pilot to the fullest, how long it takes to beat those missions will be defined by, well, how many tries it takes you. So you might potentially be stuck on one mission for hours. And then there are those missions that clearly serve more of a narrative purpose, involving you searching text logs while fighting some weak mobs who get in the way, or it might be a simple navigation mission involving you following mission markers to advance the plot. But on the other end of the spectrum, there are those huge, epic, set-piece, massive-scale, genuine showstoppers. And those are some of the coolest stuff you'll not only see in Armored Core 6, but in the mech and sci-fi genre video games. Though if I had one complaint about the game's missions, it'd be that I do think the game is a bit lacking in enemy variety for mobs and mini-bosses, especially compared to FromSoft's past outings. But you almost forget about that when the game pulls all stops with those big set-piece missions and combat scenarios, of which there are quite a few, each with their own unique jaw-dropping flavor. It's these set pieces where FromSoft clearly spent most of their time on, and I'm glad they did, as they do make for more memorable impressions. There are even VR arena combat missions that will see you test your skills against mech builds of NPCs, including the mechs of characters you'll meet throughout the course of the campaign, which get progressively more difficult as you rise through the ranks.
AP at 50%.
These are short but sweet challenges that will help you prepare for the 1v1 encounters you may partake in through online PvP, all while rewarding a currency called OS tuning chips, which can be spent on permanent upgrades that unlock new maneuvers such as the Assault Boost Kick or the Quick Turn, equipable ultimate abilities like the Assault Armor, which creates a giant energy explosion when activated, among others. New mech assembly capabilities like being able to equip hand weapons on your shoulders to allow you to forego shoulder weapons for the ability to switch between hand weapons, and upgrades to things like the effectiveness of your repair kits, your overall defense, the attack power of different weapon types, and more. So yeah, the game's got all of these fleshed out elements, and they all come together very cohesively and beautifully. Speaking of beautiful, while the game's overall graphics fidelity does not hold a candle to some of the best looking games in this generation, its art direction absolutely carries. Everything from the detail and designs of mechs to how beautiful particle effects look when they're firing off on all cylinders during combat, to how jaw-droppingly epic some of the in-game set pieces are, to how mesmerizing some of the environments can be, combined with the smooth performance of it all, I very quickly stopped caring or thinking about visual fidelity. I would say there are some blander-looking industrial environments here and there, especially in interior spaces, but overall, to my eyes, as an overall package, this game is a looker through and through, making campaign missions not just fun and satisfying to play, but frequently pleasant and mesmerizing to the eyes. Missions also have high replayability thanks to the incentives that Armored Core 6 offers. For one, after you beat a mission, replaying them allows you to aim for completion ranks determined by how fast and efficiently you finish these missions and how little damage you take. Replaying missions is also a good way to grind for money to buy mech parts, so the game rewards you even if an attempt doesn't yield the coveted S rank. When you do go back and replay missions after having obtained a powerful arsenal and more advanced mech builds, you do get to feel just how much faster you can breeze through some of these missions now and how much more easily certain bosses you might have struggled with initially can be defeated. But there are certain missions that even with the best equipment, they will still be tough challenges. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how people overcome all of this. Beyond all that though, the game encourages multiple playthroughs of the campaign, as Armored Core 6 does feature multiple endings, and which one you get depends on a few key moments in the game's campaign where you are presented with narrative-affecting mission selections that will see you permanently siding with one faction or another. Once you beat a selected narrative decision mission, you will be placed on a narrative path of no return that will have implications about what future missions you're able to tackle and which ending you're presented with. So yeah, you will not see every mission, encounter, or boss battle this game has to offer on your first playthrough. The only way to see how other choices can develop narratively and what never-before-seen missions they may unlock is to replay the campaign and make different choices. It's somewhat Star Fox 64-esque in that regard with its branching paths. Fortunately, subsequent playthroughs are made much easier by New Game Plus, which activates immediately after rolling credits on your first playthrough. You can still replay any missions that you beat on your first playthrough during New Game Plus, but the main missions will sort of reset back to Chapter 1, though because you maintain access to all of your unlocked mech parts and upgrades, you'll be breezing through the campaign much more quickly with your developed knowledge, skills, and more advanced arsenal. And without going into too much detail, new and unexpected things will unlock and present themselves on your second playthrough, and certain things can, shall we say, play out differently than they did on your first, so do not stop playing after rolling credits the first time. Now, I wasn't able to complete a second playthrough before this review, so I don't know exactly how much content there's left to see, but it does feel like there's still plenty that I haven't discovered or unlocked. Now, one thing that really surprised me was that the narrative of the game did eventually grab me. Recall that during my preview, I had reservations about the story and its presentation, as the vast majority of this game's story is told through mission briefings and debriefings, audio logs essentially, alongside the occasional text log and a handful of cutscenes, with much of the early game dialogue feeling like dry, mind-numbing exposition. And while the dialogue-heavy, exposition-heavy style of presentation with very little in the way of cutscenes does leave something to be desired, I did find that as the implications of the game's missions unravel, as different factions' agendas are slowly peeled back, and as some simple but consequential decisions start to come into play, I found myself more and more compelled by the game's world building and plot build-ups, and eventually I really found myself paying attention. There is this sense that everyone you meet wants something from your talents, but you never know exactly who to trust, on top of the fact that even if you do trust the good intentions of certain factions, their goals may come at the great sacrifice and expense of something else. And with the fate of Rubicon, the planet that Armored Core 6 is set in, resting in some of your decisions in regards to which factions you decide to side with, I found myself mulling over my decisions and wanting to experience all the other endings and narrative paths that the game can take you in. Like, we're not talking about Baldur's Gate 3 level of narrative complexity and player agency. The story is far from being the most captivating aspect of Armored Core 6, and it's hard to get invested in characters in this game because they're just talking logos rather than tangible faces and bodies you can connect with. But what is here did present compelling enough world building and made me mull over the overall plot enough that I ultimately found myself invested by the end, with hopes of learning more on my second playthrough.
Commence mission.
The cherry on top to all of this, a very important cherry at that, is that all of this is bundled in a very polished package. In my experience, major glitches or game-breaking bugs were pretty much non-existent. There were a few small technical issues though, like how when I'd go through the title screen and main menu with one input type, say keyboard and mouse or controller, and then switched inputs halfway through, the on-screen button prompts wouldn't change. They'd stay stuck at whatever control type I used to get through the title screen, forcing me to go back to the title screen and start the game with the preferred input method to see the button prompts for the right control type, which was a little annoying here and there because I have a habit of going through the title menu on the keyboard and mouse and then picking up my controller. Another bug that I encountered was that quick turn, which is executed by inputting down on the left analog stick and hitting the right face button at the same time, wouldn't work unless I push the analog stick down at a very specific distance. If I push the analog stick too little or too far down, the quick turn would just not activate. So that made this feature too finicky and in turn obsolete while this issue persisted. Other than that though, yeah, I mean, it was pretty much smooth sailing from beginning to end. There are also zero monetization schemes in this game to corrupt the game's intended vision and design. It's as pure a video game as we have come to expect from FromSoftware. The level of cosmetic customization in particular is utterly insane, and whereas other companies might charge overpriced fees for individual textures, colors, emblems, and skins, Armored Core 6 offers an infinite palette of colors, customization tools, cosmetic options, and whatnot to allow you to express yourself through the blank canvases that are your mechs with no limitations whatsoever. It's genuinely one of the most impressive, unrestricted, complex, yet intuitive cosmetic customization systems I've ever seen in a video game, and a paragon example of what the standard should be. I don't know what else there is left to say except I loved my time with Armored Core 6, and I don't feel like I'm close to done with it. I haven't even had a chance to engage with the game's PvP multiplayer mode during this review period, a mode that I prefer to test out when servers go online en masse at launch. But if footage that they've shown through marketing is any indication, and if my experience with arena battles against AI bots customized mechs is anything to go by, I imagine that PvP by itself will keep many players hooked for months, if not years to come, so long as server stability and netcode are on point when the game fully launches. I cannot wait to see the kind of high-level mech building, theory crafting, metas, and plays we'll see from the most devoted and skilled players. I get the feeling that high-level matches are going to be quite the sight to behold. Now, even if you're not a PvP multiplayer type of person, I think you will be drawn into the single-player experience if you're willing to go through the process of overcoming challenges through just getting more skilled at the game's combat mechanics, as well as just building mechs and experimenting until something clicks. I'm just really pumped that this game exists at all. As an avid lover of mechs in general, to see a mech video game garner so much attention and succeed in its ambitions at such a high quality level genuinely brings me great joy. FromSoftware, you can tell, has come a long way since their last Armored Core entry, and I hope that this is the start of a great renaissance for Armored Core that will see the series thrive with future expansions or sequels to build upon what is already an excellent and fleshed out foundation, and a victorious return for not only the long dormant Armored Core series, but also for the mech genre as a whole.